Learn something new? Hit that like button, share it with others, tap subscribe, and stick around for more. Got thoughts? I'd love to hear them in the comments. Ever notice how some people just make you feel incredible after talking to them? You walk away thinking, wow, what a great conversation. But here's the weird part. They barely talked about themselves at all. That's not an accident. It's the connection equation at work. And questions are the most powerful variable in that equation. We all claim to want deeper connections, yet we spend most conversations waiting for our turn to speak. It's like showing up to a feast but bringing only photos of your own cooking. Here's the truth. Your brain is literally hardwired to bond with people who show genuine curiosity about you. When someone asks you thoughtful questions, your brain releases oxytocin, the same chemical that creates maternal bonds and romantic attachment. So questions aren't just conversational tools, they're biochemical connection creators. This changes everything about how we should approach conversations. It's not about being interesting. It's about being interested. Questions are the difference between forgettable interactions and relationships that last. They transform how people think about you without changing a single thing about who you are. We've all experienced it. Think about the last person who really asked about your passions, dreams, or even your weekend, and genuinely listened to your answer. How did you feel about them afterward? That's exactly what others will feel about you when you master the art of asking questions that matter. Chapter 1. The Brain Science of Being Remembered. Here's something amazing about your brain. It's constantly filtering information, deciding what to remember and what to forget. And one of the strongest filters is emotional significance. When you're asked a thoughtful question that makes you feel seen and understood, your brain flags that interaction as important. It's the difference between someone going into your mental interesting person folder versus your forgettable interaction trash bin. We remember people who make us feel something, and great questions make people feel understood, valued, and interesting. It's like having a superpower for being memorable without saying much about yourself at all. You could spend hours talking about your accomplishments, or you could ask one question that makes someone feel truly seen. Guess which approach creates a stronger memory? It's not even close. It's actually pretty funny. We obsess over what to say about ourselves, when the real secret to being remembered has nothing to do with talking about ourselves at all. We're all preparing for the wrong test. The curiosity gap is another powerful brain principle at work here. When you ask an intriguing question, it creates an open loop in the other person's mind. Their brain wants to close that loop by exploring the answer. This creates engagement at a neurological level. So when you master questions, you're not just making conversation, you're working with the fundamental architecture of human memory and connection. That's power. Chapter 2, Open versus Closed, the question structure that makes a whole difference. Not all questions are created equal. The structure of your question determines the depth of connection it creates. Closed questions can be answered with a simple yes, no, or single word. Did you have a good weekend? Do you like your job? These questions technically show interest, but their conversation dead ends. Open questions, on the other hand, invite stories, perspectives, and genuine sharing. What was the highlight of your weekend? What aspects of your work do you find most fulfilling? See the difference? It's like the difference between offering someone a single potato chip versus an entire meal. Which one creates a more satisfying experience? Here's a simple upgrade that transforms any basic question. Instead of asking, did you, do you, or have you, start with, learn something new? Hit that like button, share it with others, tap subscribe, and stick around for more. Got thoughts? I'd love to hear them in the comments. With what, how, or in what way. This small shift creates questions that people actually enjoy answering. We often default to closed questions because they feel safer. They require less vulnerability from both parties. But connection happens in the vulnerability zone, not the safety zone. Another powerful structure is the "what about you" question. Notice how frequently mediocre conversationalists start with I statements. I went to that restaurant last week. I love that book too. Try flipping it. What did you think of the food there? What resonated with you about that book? Open questions aren't just technically superior. They send a powerful social signal. They say, I'm genuinely interested in your full perspective, not just checking a conversation box. And that's a signal people rarely forget. Chapter 3. The follow-up secret most people miss. Here's where most conversations fall apart. The follow-up question, or more accurately, the lack of one. Research from Harvard shows that asking follow-up questions is one of the strongest predictors of being liked and creating connection. Yet most people ask one question, listen to the answer, and immediately pivot to talking about themselves. Something magic happens in the second, third, and fourth questions when you go deeper into what someone just shared. It signals that you're not just making conversation. You're genuinely interested in understanding them. Think about it this way. The first question opens the door, but the follow-up questions walk you into the house. And most people never make it past the doorway. When someone answers your question, they're giving you a map of what matters to them. Each detail they emphasize is essentially saying, this is important to me. Great follow-ups pick up on these breadcrumbs. Let me give you an example. If you ask, how was your weekend? And they say, pretty good, I finally got to that hiking trail I've been wanting to check out. Most people would respond with, oh cool, I went hiking last month too. But the connection creator follows up. What drew you to that particular trail? Or what do you enjoy most about hiking? The difference is laughably simple, yet the impact is profound. One approach makes the conversation about you, while the other makes it about them. And here's the irony. The person focusing on the other will be remembered as the better conversationalist. When you master follow-up questions, you transform from an interviewer into someone who genuinely connects. The difference is felt rather than seen. Chapter 4. The 70-30 Rule of Conversation. There's a golden ratio to connection-creating conversations. The 70-30 rule. The person you're talking with should speak roughly 70% of the time, while you speak 30%. This might sound extreme, especially if you've been raised to think being interesting means talking about yourself. But the most charismatic people in the world know that being interested is far more powerful than being interesting. The 70-30 rule isn't about being silent or turning into an interviewer. It's about directing the conversational spotlight onto the other person, making them the star of the interaction. Here's where most people get it backward. They think the goal of conversation is to impress the other person with their knowledge, experiences, or wit. But what if I told you that approach almost never works? People rarely remember what you told them, but they always remember how you made them feel. And nothing makes someone feel better than being genuinely heard. The 70-30 ratio creates a psychological safe space where people feel valued. And when people feel valued, they associate those positive feelings with you. It's like emotional alchemy. Think about a time when someone let you talk about something you were passionate about. How did that make you feel about them? Now imagine creating that feeling for everyone you meet. Ironically, following the 70-30 rule actually makes you seem more interesting, not less. It's the conversational equivalent of playing hard to get. When you share less, people become more curious about you. Chapter 5. Questions that create psychological safety. The most powerful questions make people feel safe to share authentically. This is what psychologists call psychological safety, the feeling that you can be yourself without judgment. When you create this safety through your questions, people open up in ways they rarely do with others. The result? A connection that goes beyond surface-level chit-chat. Let's talk about verbal cushioning, a technique that makes potentially sensitive questions feel safer. Instead of asking, "Why did you leave your last job?" you might say, "If you're comfortable sharing, I'd be curious to hear what led you to make a change professionally." See how that creates a buffer of safety? You're acknowledging the potential sensitivity and giving them an easy out. Another technique is what I call sharing the step, where you offer a small, related self-disclosure before asking your question. I found my first year after college pretty challenging. How was that transition for you? This works because vulnerability tends to be reciprocal. When you show a small amount of authentic vulnerability, others feel safer doing the same. Here's the funny thing about safety. We all want it, yet we rarely create it for others. We're so worried about being judged that we forget everyone else feels the same way. Questions that validate before they probe create instant safety. That sounds challenging. How did you handle it? What an interesting choice. What led you in that direction? The validation preemptively removes judgment, creating space for authentic sharing. And hey, if you found this video helpful, make sure to hit like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Chapter 6. Reading the room before you ask. Even the perfect question can fall flat if asked at the wrong time or in the wrong context. Reading the room is the unspoken art of question asking. The first thing to assess is the person's current emotional state. Are they relaxed and open, stressed or distracted, in a hurry? Your question should match their state. If someone seems rushed or preoccupied, deep philosophical questions will feel invasive rather than connecting. If they're relaxed and contemplative, surface-level questions will feel unsatisfying. We've all been guilty of asking tone-deaf questions, like asking about someone's dating life right after they've gone through a breakup. Reading the room helps you avoid these connection-killing moments. Nonverbal cues tell you almost everything you need to know about someone's openness to questions. Crossed arms, minimal eye contact, short responses. These all signal that deeper questions might not be welcome yet. Conversely, someone leaning forward, making strong eye contact, and elaborating on answers is essentially sending you an invitation for more meaningful questions. Cultural context also matters tremendously. Questions that work perfectly in one culture can be offensive in another. What's considered appropriate curiosity versus invasive prying varies widely across cultures. The setting also dictates appropriate question depth. A networking event calls for different questions than a one-on-one coffee meetup. Group settings typically warrant lighter questions than private conversations. Here's a simple rule. The less familiar the relationship, the more you should start with questions that are easy and comfortable to answer. As trust builds, you can gradually increase the depth. Chapter 7. From small talk to deep connection. Small talk gets a bad rap, but it actually serves an important purpose. It's the conversational equivalent of warming up before exercise. The problem isn't small talk itself, it's getting stuck there. There are 5 levels of conversational depth: cliches and pleasantries, facts and information, personal opinions, feelings and experiences, and finally, needs, hopes, and dreams. Most conversations never make it past level 2. But that's where the real connection happens, at levels 4 and 5. The trick is knowing how to transition between levels without making it feel forced or awkward. And that comes down to the questions you ask. Here's how you might progress naturally. Start with, "How's your week been going?" Level 1. Then move to, "What's been keeping you busy lately?" Level 2. Then, "What aspects of that do you find most engaging?" Level 3. Then, "How did you first realize that was something you cared about?" Level 4. And finally, "Where do you hope that might lead you in the future?" Level 5. Each question builds naturally on the previous answer, creating a smooth depth progression that doesn't feel forced. Here's a counterintuitive truth. People are often relieved to move beyond small talk. We stick to it because it feels safe, but it's actually unsatisfying for everyone involved. The key is finding universal deep topics that are meaningful without being too personal. Questions about values, lessons learned, or sources of enjoyment tend to work well. What's been bringing you joy lately? What's something you've changed your mind about in the last few years? It's funny. We're all walking around hungry for meaningful connection, yet we keep serving each other conversational empty calories. Be the person who brings nutritious questions to the table. Chapter 8. Digital questions, connection through screens. Asking great questions becomes even more important when connecting digitally. Without body language and other nonverbal cues, your questions do even more heavy lifting. Digital communication, whether text, email, or video calls, creates unique challenges. Messages can feel abrupt, tone is easily misinterpreted, and it's harder to build rapport. The solution? Questions that compensate for what's missing in digital interaction. Questions that acknowledge context, check emotional temperature, and create clarity. In text-based communication, questions that might work well in person can come across as interrogative or abrupt. Softening language becomes even more important. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, rather than, what do you think about? Video calls create a unique challenge, the illusion of in-person interaction without many of its benefits. Screen fatigue is real, making open-ended questions even more valuable. They require less back and forth, creating more natural conversation flow. Here's a technique that works surprisingly well in digital formats: the check-in question. Before we dive in, how's your energy today? Or how's your week been unfolding? These create context that would normally be visible in person. Digital communication often lacks the meta conversation, those subtle adjustments we make based on physical cues. Questions can help recreate this. Does this feel like the right direction for our discussion? Would it be helpful to explore this aspect further? The digital world makes it easier to hide, but ironically, people often crave authenticity even more online. Questions that invite authentic sharing create rare moments of genuine connection in an often superficial digital landscape. Chapter 9. The questions you should never ask. Even the most skilled conversationalists need to know where the boundaries are. Some questions, no matter how well-intentioned, create disconnection rather than connection. First on the list, questions that create defensiveness. These typically start with why and feel like challenges rather than curiosity. Why would you choose that career? Why don't you just... Why questions often make people feel they need to justify themselves. Try replacing why with what or how. What drew you to that career? How do you approach that challenge? Another category to avoid, the hidden agenda question. These are questions that aren't actually seeking information, but are disguised statements or judgments. Don't you think that's a bit risky? Wouldn't you rather have a more stable job? People can sense when your question contains a hidden opinion or judgment, and it immediately creates distance. Leading questions are equally problematic. These presuppose an answer or push someone in a particular direction. You must be exhausted from that, right? Isn't that frustrating? Even if you're right about how they feel, leading questions take away people's agency to define their own experience. They feel manipulative rather than curious. Question stacking is another common mistake, asking multiple questions before the person can answer the first one. It creates cognitive overload and makes authentic answering difficult. One question at a time, asked with genuine curiosity and given space for a full answer, is always more effective than a barrage of questions, no matter how well crafted. The most counterintuitive advice of all. Sometimes the best question is no question. Knowing when silence or a supportive statement is more appropriate than another question is the mark of true conversational intelligence. Chapter 10. Putting it all together. Your question toolkit. We've covered a lot of ground, so let's bring it all together into a practical question toolkit you can use immediately. First, your opener questions. designed to create initial comfort while opening doors to deeper conversation. What's been occupying your mind lately? What's something you're looking forward to? These work because they're open-ended without being too personal. Next, your follow-up toolkit, the secret weapon of great conversationalists. What was that experience like for you? How did that impact your perspective? What did you learn from that? For creating psychological safety, keep these in your back pocket. I'm curious about your perspective on if you're comfortable sharing. What's your take on this? I'd really value your thoughts. To show you're truly listening, use reflective questions. It sounds like blank was important to you. So you felt blank when that happened? These demonstrate you're not just hearing words but understanding meaning. It's not about memorizing perfect questions. It's about cultivating genuine curiosity about others. When you're truly curious, the right questions flow naturally. The most important element isn't the question itself, but the listening that follows. A mediocre question followed by excellent. Learned something new? Hit that like button, share it with others, tap subscribe, and stick around for more. Got thoughts? I'd love to hear them in the comments.